So our question is, how has the gentrification of Brighton affected house prices in the last 25 years? And we chose to do this research question because as a group we have a collective interest in the topic, and we saw there's a lot of discussion in the media surrounding gentrification in Brighton. So in terms of our aims, we want to find whether there's a relationship between gentrification in Brighton and its house prices, and also to identify the array of areas that have been gentrified in Brighton and look at the house prices for those areas, and also to retrieve public perceptions on gentrification in Brighton through various techniques. In terms of the objectives, primary data collection, we want to do questionnaires to get a gauge of what people think about gentrification in the area, as well as interviewing estate agents and shop owners to see how prices have increased. And we also want to do some visual methods, such as taking photos of the gentrified areas and comparing them to what they looked like in the past. In terms of the secondary data collection, we want to read some current literature on the topic, as well as looking at house prices online.
So now I'm going to look at research methods and ethical issues. So to investigate our question best, we thought we'd use questionnaires, interviews, and then we'd use visual methods to back up the data we've collected from our sources and our secondary data. We'd use the photographs we've gathered in the field to then sum up this data. We conducted our research in particular in Hanover, which is an area of Brighton that we identified before the trip as having a high level of gentrification. We identified Barry Alderton and the Archers Butchers as two key areas that we needed to investigate, and we spent around 5 to 10 minutes interviewing both of them. Here's a typical street in Hanover, which you can see is quite a gentrified area and has changed over time. Here shows our legend and our use of ArcGIS and maps to create a distribution of where our questionnaires and interviews were gathered. The light blue star represents where the interviews were gathered, and the green stars represent where our questionnaires were gathered. And as you can see, they all remain within central Brighton, within a small area, to gain a reliability of responses. With our ethical documents, we have the informed consent form and the participant information sheet, which we thought were very important in our investigation, as the title of our topic could potentially be intrusive into people's livelihoods, and we didn't want to approach people that were vulnerable or ask people questions that might offend them or hurt them in any way at all. So then in particular, looking at the interviews, we used unstructured interviews to allow respondents to express their ideas at their own pace, which worked in particularly well at Archers Butchers, and Jamshed 2014 referenced this as well. And then with the questionnaires, we distributed them randomly using a random sample amongst the Brighton population. It consisted of 8 questions, and we aimed to conduct 20 questionnaires. Lastly, as I've said, with the visual methods, we made sure we met CU ethics procedures and didn't take any pictures with people in them, and if we did, we'd ask for their permission beforehand in order to be in line with CU ethics. Now going on to the literature review, our key literature was Smith and Holt 2007, which looked at the studentification and gentrification of Brighton with Bordeaux's cultural capital theory and also the theory of taste. This allowed us to gain an insight into Brighton, but we wanted to research in particular just gentrification, not the studentification, and some other supplementary literature helped us to understand where to investigate our secondary sources.
So this section of the PowerPoint presentation is just going to go over the primary data collection that we went through. So one of the main methods that we used was interviews, and they were really informal and unstructured, so it allowed us to explore a range of topics in detail and give the participants a chance to explain absolutely everything they wanted on the subject, so therefore would gain more information, more of an insight into the subject. So this is just going through our interview results. Probably the most significant interview we got was at Archers Butchers in Hanover. This was a really key interview, as the man that we spoke to there had lived there for generations, and he'd really experienced the way that gentrification had impacted upon the area. And this was probably most shown best through the way that he said that there was a multitude of butchers in the area, but nowadays he's the only one left, so it shows how gentrification's impacted on service provision in the area. But we also gained some conflicting opinions during our interview. So, for example, Talassi Gift Shop said that there wasn't any gentrification in the area, and Damden and Dress also expressed a similar opinion, whereas the owners of the Grays pub and Barry Anderson estate agents said that there was a lot of gentrification in the area. So another main method that we used was questionnaires. This slide just shows the questionnaire format that we had, and we felt that questionnaires were a good method to use as they allowed us to gain as much information as possible in a very efficient manner. And we also attempted to tackle key themes within the gentrification, such as associations with students, as we already previously found out about that through our prior reading. And from my questionnaire results, we were able to generate a range of graphs and also a map. So the map shows the gentrified areas that were most common during our questionnaire. So we found that Hanover was the most popular choice for gentrification from our respondents. We also found that a massive 82% of the participants in the study felt that house prices had increased, and this is directly linked to gentrification. We also use visual methods, however these are more of a supplementary method, and they've just contributed to diversifying our research. So as you can see, we used the archive photo of Hanover in 1928 compared it to 2019.
Okay, so in terms of our secondary data, we've looked at the market statistics to determine how gentrification has affected housing prices in Brighton over the last 24 years. Apart from the major fall in 2009, the house prices have been gradually increasing since 1995, with an overall rise of 611%, making it one of the biggest in the UK. As of December 2018, the average house price in Brighton is 368,781, which is 33% higher than the average house price in the UK. Many Brighton residents cannot afford to buy a house. According to the latest market report for Brighton and Hove, in order to buy a house for the average price, the affordable income stands at 82,272, whereas the median salary for Brighton stands at 27,800. The fact that the house has become less affordable for many may contribute to the decreasing trend of property sales, with 49% fewer houses sold over the last 20 years. In terms of rental costs, the August 2018 states that rent in Brighton and Hove is rising faster than in any other city in England and Wales. When comparing the average property rents in Brighton with East Sussex, Brighton residents spend on average 14% more on their rent. And what is more, according to job website Adzuna, Brighton residents are spending over a third of their wages on rent. The rapid increase of rent makes it no longer affordable for many and leads to negative consequences. As an example, found in an online article, an award-winning and one of the Brighton's oldest pub was forced to close after its rent tripled. And for another example, the artists from the Herring studio were pushed out of Brighton and Hove because of gentrification of the area. As the studio was replaced by new homes, they had to find a new base, and eventually the studio moved 2 miles west to more affordable Portslade.
To our conclusion and evaluation, our questionnaire data highlights that there is a clear positive correlation between gentrification and house prices in Brighton, with most respondents saying that the gentrification of Brighton has increased overall house prices. When interviewing estate agents, they highlighted that house prices have increased over the last 25 years, and this has negatively impacted residents, who are then feeling excluded and outpriced of their home communities. Our quantitative data highlights the major overall rise of house prices since 1995 and the huge expense of house prices in Brighton compared to other areas in the UK, being 33% higher above the national average. Our qualitative data highlights the negative impacts of the increase in rental prices in Brighton to local residents, including the forced closure of community spaces. This is our overall conclusion. Gentrification has increased house prices and negatively impacted local residents within Brighton. However, we found that the negative impacts to locals are not always to the same extent across the city. This can be highlighted with positive impacts to local businesses in Hanover, with Archer's Butchers thriving off gentrification and still running for over 100 years. Here are positive reflections. The main positive was that our questionnaires were answered by an equal amount of male to female respondents. This made our data representative and unbiased. The main problem we faced when collecting questionnaires was that some members of the public did not want to answer. Our data collection was limited due to reduced number of respondents. If we did this research again, we'd make future improvements, including to question more people and a wider range of respondents. This would include asking more people with different gender identities and ethnicities. This would give us a wider sample range and more representative results. And here is our reference lists.